Everyone thought the mafia boss was untouchable, but on the night he nearly collapsed in front of 300 guests, only one person noticed the detail that would change everything. The ballroom of the Moretti Grand Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Soft classical music drifted through the air while Chicago's elite moved between marble columns and gold-trimmed tables, laughing over expensive wine and carefully crafted conversations. At the center of it all stood Dominic Moretti. At 39 years old, he was one of the most powerful men in the city. His tailored black tuxedo fit perfectly. His posture was straight. His expression was calm. To everyone watching, he looked exactly as he always did. Strong, controlled, unshakable. Yet appearances could be deceiving. Dominic lifted a crystal glass during a charity speech, offering a brief nod to the crowd. Applause echoed through the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Guests smiled. But as he lowered the glass, something changed. For less than a second, his hand trembled. The movement was so subtle that nobody reacted. The politicians did not notice. The business executives did not notice. Even the members of his own security team missed it. Dominic himself seemed determined to ignore it. He continued speaking, his voice steady and confident, but a faint tension had appeared around his eyes. Then came another detail. A small pause. Barely noticeable. Just long enough for someone paying close attention to wonder why. Dominic reached for the edge of the podium. His fingers tightened against the polished wood. The room remained focused on his speech. Nobody suspected anything was wrong. Nobody except Olivia Carter. Olivia stood near the back of the ballroom beside a service cart, quietly collecting empty glasses. She was not a guest. She was not part of the event staff. She was one of the cleaning ladies employed by the Moretti organization. Most people in the room had walked past her without a second glance. That was normal. Olivia had spent most of her life being invisible. Invisible people learned things. They learned how to listen, how to observe, how to notice details others ignored. As she watched Dominic, a knot formed in her stomach. Something about his face looked familiar. Not the confidence, not the authority, the exhaustion. Years earlier, Olivia had spent nearly 5 years caring for her father during a long illness. She remembered the signs, the forced smiles, the hidden discomfort, the determination to pretend everything was fine even when it clearly was not. Dominic continued speaking for another minute before his words slowed. Not enough for the audience to question him, just enough for Olivia to notice. Then his gaze drifted toward the crowd. His focus seemed distant for a moment, almost unfocused. A security guard stepped slightly closer. Dominic blinked once and immediately recovered. The crowd never noticed the interruption. They applauded again. Some even stood. But Olivia's concern only grew stronger. Dominic finished the speech and stepped away from the podium. Several influential guests approached him at once. Handshakes, smiles, conversations. Yet as he moved through the ballroom, Olivia saw something else. His complexion looked unusually pale beneath the warm lighting. Not dramatically, just enough to stand out if someone knew what to look for. 20 minutes later, the event continued as planned. Servers moved between tables. Music played. Guests laughed. Meanwhile, Dominic stood near a private seating area, speaking with donors. A glass of sparkling water rested beside him. Olivia watched from across the room as one of Dominic's senior assistants approached the table. The man exchanged a few quiet words before briefly touching the glass. It seemed harmless, ordinary, completely forgettable. Yet for reasons she could not explain, Olivia's attention lingered on the moment. Seconds later, Dominic reached for the drink. He took a sip, then another. Less than 5 minutes passed before the change became visible. His shoulders stiffened. His expression tightened. He reached for the arm of a nearby chair as though steadying himself. A few guests looked concerned. Dominic forced a smile and assured everyone he was fine. But Olivia knew better. She had seen that look before. The room continued, celebrating while the most powerful man in Chicago quietly struggled to remain standing. And as Olivia stared across the ballroom, she realized she had just witnessed the same pattern for the 3rd time in 2 months. The same pale face, the same sudden weakness, the same mysterious timing. For the first time, she stopped wondering if it was a coincidence. Olivia Carter moved silently through the quiet halls of the Moretti mansion early the next morning, her footsteps muffled against the polished hardwood floors. Carrying a tray of cleaning supplies and a notebook, where she had been carefully recording small details for weeks. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air, highlighting the meticulous order of the grand estate and the invisibility that Olivia had perfected over months of work. Unnoticed by most, but acutely aware of every subtle movement around her. She stopped briefly outside Dominic Moretti's private office, glancing at the darkened glass doors and noting the faint sounds of his morning routine, the scrape of a chair and the soft rustle of paper that only someone paying close attention could detect, confirming patterns she had begun to recognize, the same signs of fatigue, the same slight hesitation in his movements, the same brief pale flush across his face that had caught her attention at the last gala. Olivia's hands tightened briefly around the handles of the tray as she considered how often she had noticed these irregularities while others remained oblivious, her mind running through the careful notes she had taken, the patterns that were slowly forming a story, a narrative hidden in the rhythms of a man who commanded the city yet concealed his vulnerabilities with practiced ease. She moved into the sunlit breakfast room, arranging silverware and straightening linens, every motion precise and unobtrusive. Yet her gaze continually returned to the office, watching and waiting, mentally comparing each small detail with the previous days, noting the timing of Dominic's coffee breaks, the moments when his expression shifted, subtle tremors in his hands when holding objects, and the unusual way he sometimes leaned against the desk to steady himself, all of which whispered a secret illness no one else had noticed. As she bent to dust the lower shelves, Olivia's mind drifted to her own past experiences caring for her ailing father, the long nights spent observing symptoms, recording them, learning to trust her instincts when no one else did, and she realized that her training in observation, her patience, and her invisibility in the eyes of the powerful had prepared her for this very moment, to see what nobody else could see and to act when the time was right. The mansion's grand chandelier glinted faintly in the morning light, casting patterns across the floor as she moved from room to room, her eyes scanning for any unusual behavior from Dominic's staff, noting the small, almost imperceptible ways they adjusted his drinks or passed him documents. Details invisible to the casual observer, but strikingly clear to someone who had spent months learning the nuances of human behavior and environmental cues, the quiet detective work of a person forced to exist on the margins, yet capable of affecting outcomes in ways the powerful could not imagine. She paused at a table, jotting a few observations in her notebook, the tip of her pen moving carefully across the page as she noted timing, positioning, and subtle changes in expression, all under the soft ambient hum of the mansion awakening, distant voices echoing faintly from the staff quarters, the smells of freshly brewed coffee and polished wood surrounding her, grounding her while she pieced together the hidden truth. Olivia's focus was unbroken, her posture calm but alert, every sense engaged, attuned to the small cues that would reveal the pattern she had long suspected, and as she finally lifted her gaze toward the office once more, she felt a surge of certainty that the fragile evidence she had been quietly assembling would soon allow her to uncover the mystery that had plagued Dominic Moretti for months, a secret that no one else had noticed or cared to investigate. And in that quiet early morning light, the invisible cleaning lady began to feel the weight of her unique role, the responsibility of being the only one paying attention when it mattered most. By the end of the week, Olivia's notebook contained nearly 36 observations, each written in careful handwriting and organized by date, time, and location. What had begun as a vague concern was slowly transforming into something far more troubling. The pattern was no longer difficult to see. The challenge was proving it. Late Friday afternoon, sunlight spilled through the mansion's western windows, painting long golden rectangles across the marble floors as Olivia cleaned a conference room adjacent to Dominic Moretti's private office. The room had recently hosted a strategy meeting, and empty water glasses remained scattered across the polished table. Olivia moved quietly between the chairs, collecting them one by one, but her attention shifted when she noticed voices approaching from the hallway. Instinctively, she continued working while listening. Dominic entered with several senior advisors. Among them was Ethan Caldwell, his trusted executive assistant. Ethan had worked beside Dominic for years. He managed schedules, coordinated meetings, and accompanied him almost everywhere. Most employees viewed him as one of the most dependable people in the organization. Olivia had never questioned that reputation. Until recently, as the group settled into conversation, Olivia noticed something she had seen before. Ethan reached for Dominic's glass before anyone else touched it. His movement was casual, natural, the kind of gesture nobody would remember 5 minutes later. He adjusted the glass slightly, exchanged a few words with another advisor, and stepped back. Nothing appeared unusual, yet Olivia felt her pulse quicken, because she had documented similar moments multiple times. 3 weeks ago during a fundraising luncheon, 2 weeks ago before a private dinner, earlier this week at the hotel gala. Every time Dominic later appeared unwell, Ethan had been among the last people near his drinks beforehand. Olivia forced herself to remain objective. Correlation was not proof. Her father had taught her that years ago. When caring for him, she had learned that assumptions could be dangerous. Facts mattered. Evidence mattered. Emotions did not. Still, the repetition was impossible to ignore. After the meeting concluded, Olivia continued her duties throughout the mansion. Yet her mind remained focused on the same question. Why was Ethan always present when the symptoms appeared? That evening, Dominic hosted a smaller gathering in his private library. Business associates arrived just before sunset, their conversations drifting through the mansion's corridors. Olivia worked nearby, dusting bookshelves and organizing decorative displays. Through the partially open doorway, she occasionally glanced toward the gathering. Dominic appeared healthy enough at first, relaxed, focused, engaged in conversation. Then Ethan entered carrying a tray of refreshments. Olivia stopped dusting. Her eyes followed every movement. Ethan distributed beverages around the room with practiced efficiency. Dominic accepted a cup of tea. The conversation continued. 10 minutes passed. 15. Then Olivia noticed it. Dominic rubbed his temple. A small gesture, barely noticeable. 20 minutes later, he leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression tightening for just a moment before he masked it with a polite smile. The exact same progression. The exact same timeline. Olivia's stomach sank. This was no longer a coincidence. She waited until the gathering ended before returning to the small staff quarters where she kept her notebook hidden inside a drawer. Sitting beneath the soft glow of a desk lamp, she reviewed every entry she had collected. Dates, locations, symptoms, witnesses. The evidence formed a clear sequence. In every case, Ethan Caldwell had been present immediately beforehand. Olivia stared at the pages for a long time. The realization frightened her. Not because she knew the answer, because she did not. She had uncovered a pattern, but she still had no explanation. And somewhere inside the vast mansion, the most powerful man in Chicago continued trusting someone who appeared in every chapter of a mystery nobody else seemed willing to see. Olivia sat at the small wooden table in the corner of the staff quarters, her notebook open and a pen poised, reviewing each entry she had. Meticulously recorded over the past few weeks, the soft light of a desk lamp casting warm circles across the page, while the mansion remained quiet in the late afternoon, the distant hum of air vents and occasional footsteps echoing faintly through the halls. Each observation was carefully cross-referenced. The time Dominic Moretti had shown signs of fatigue, the location he had been, the presence of Ethan Caldwell, the assistant who always seemed to appear just before the symptoms manifested. Olivia's mind moved like a chess player, connecting patterns, eliminating coincidences, building a framework that was more than intuition. It was a methodical reconstruction of hidden events. Her fingers drummed lightly against the notebook as she traced each sequence, noting the repeated gestures, the subtle tension in Dominic's posture after taking a drink, the fleeting pallor across his complexion, all details that no one else seemed to notice or care about. She glanced toward the small window beside her, watching the sunlight begin to fade behind the city skyline, creating long shadows that stretched across the quiet streets and tall buildings beyond, mirroring the shadows she had been piecing together within the walls of the mansion. Olivia's heart beat steadily, each pulse reminding her of the responsibility she had quietly assumed, not for recognition, not for praise, but because the truth had to be observed, understood, and preserved before it was lost in the rhythm of daily routines and overlooked gestures. After several minutes, she leaned back slightly, letting her eyes sweep over the room. visualizing the paths Dominic and his staff had taken throughout the day, replaying conversations and movements in her mind, noting discrepancies that might have been dismissed by anyone else, and cataloging details that together formed an undeniable story. The quiet creak of the floorboards signaled Dominic's return, and Olivia's gaze lifted just enough to see him approach from the hall, moving with the same practiced ease and measured authority that he displayed in every room of the mansion, unaware that the woman he considered invisible had already started to unravel a truth that could not remain hidden. She observed him pour a cup of tea, adjusting the handle carefully before lifting it to his lips, and her breath caught as her prior entries confirmed her suspicion. Every instance of his sudden fatigue, every unsteady gesture, every fleeting moment of pallor had occurred in sequence with the presence of Ethan Caldwell, a pattern repeating with an almost imperceptible consistency that now demanded attention. Olivia's pen moved again, annotating her observations with even greater precision, documenting times, positions, and subtle cues that could later serve as proof, all while maintaining the quiet hum of her routine cleaning and the undisturbed appearance of the staff quarters. As the afternoon light faded completely and shadows deepened across the room, Olivia placed her pen down and exhaled softly, her eyes fixed on Dominic through the partially open door, recognizing that the puzzle she had been assembling in silence was finally coming into focus, that the hidden narrative she had suspected was no longer merely conjecture, and that the moment to act, to reveal the pattern she had so carefully documented, was approaching with the certainty and weight of meticulous observation and unyielding patience. Olivia waited until the mansion had grown quiet, the soft golden light of late afternoon streaming through the tall windows, casting long reflections across the polished marble floors as she carefully moved a stack of freshly laundered napkins to their proper place, her attention never leaving Dominic Moretti as he settled into his private study with a cup of tea, appearing calm and composed to any casual observer, but revealing in subtle ways the lingering effects of his mysterious illness. She had documented every small gesture, every slight change in complexion, every hand movement over the past weeks, and now the full pattern pressed on her mind, urging her to act while maintaining her usual invisibility. She paused to adjust a decorative vase on the sideboard, her movements precise, almost imperceptible, yet her eyes tracked Dominic across the room, noting the slight stiffness in his posture, the careful way he raised the cup to his lips, the faint tension in his jaw, and she recognized in that moment the same sequence that had occurred at the gala, at the luncheon, at each meeting over the last month, every instance confirming the suspicions she had been quietly building. Olivia's mind raced as she replayed every detail, connecting the presence of Ethan Caldwell, the executive assistant, in each scenario, and the subtle way he had been positioned near Dominic during drinks or casual breaks, the sequence consistent enough to suggest intention rather than accident. Her fingers moved quickly across her notebook, annotating once more, highlighting time, position, and response, ensuring that the evidence could not be dismissed as coincidence, each notation bringing the invisible pattern into clarity. She stepped back for a moment, glancing at the expansive shelves of books, the sunlight catching the spines in warm highlights, and allowed herself a brief breath, knowing that she was the only person in the entire mansion capable of seeing what had gone unnoticed for weeks. As Dominic sipped his tea and read through a series of documents, oblivious to her quiet observation, Olivia reflected on her own patience, her careful training in noticing small cues, the years spent watching for signals of illness and distress in her family, and how those lessons had equipped her to uncover this hidden truth. She began planning the next steps carefully, considering how to approach him without alarming him, how to present observations that would be undeniable yet gentle, knowing that any misstep could cause him to withdraw further or dismiss her entirely. The mansion's stillness offered both cover and pressure, each sound amplified, every echo a reminder of the silence she had to maintain while assembling proof. Olivia's breath was steady, but her pulse quickened as she realized the opportunity approaching, a private moment where Dominic would be alone, attentive, and where she could bridge the gap between observation and revelation. With her notebook secured and her notes neatly reviewed, she positioned herself near the study doorway, ready to act, poised to finally make her presence known in a way that mattered. and feeling the weight of responsibility settle comfortably across her shoulders as the person who had noticed what nobody else would. The invisible observer who now held the knowledge that could change everything. That evening, as the sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, Olivia carried her notebook quietly through the mansion's hallways, every step deliberate and nearly soundless on the polished hardwood floors, the soft golden light from wall sconces casting long, gentle shadows that stretched across the vast corridors and highlighted the intricate molding of the ceilings, reminding her of the careful attention to detail she had always observed in her work. She paused outside Dominic Moretti's study, peeking through the slightly ajar door, watching him review a stack of documents while seated at his mahogany desk, the faint tension in his shoulders betraying the exhaustion he carefully concealed from everyone else. And she noted the subtle way he adjusted his posture and rubbed the bridge of his nose, familiar signs she had come to recognize over weeks of careful observation. Olivia moved closer, quietly arranging a small stack of folders on a nearby credenza, all the while keeping her eyes on Dominic, mentally rehearsing how she would present her findings without startling him or causing immediate dismissal of her observations, knowing that the timing and delivery would be crucial to ensure he understood the truth she had painstakingly uncovered. As she positioned herself in the corner of the room, she recalled the earlier instances she had recorded in her notebook, each moment lining up with the presence of his assistant, Ethan Caldwell, and the way Dominic's symptoms followed shortly thereafter, a pattern that was now undeniable when reviewed collectively, yet subtle enough that no one else had noticed it before. Olivia's hands were steady, her breath measured, and her focus sharp as she prepared to take the first step toward revealing the sequence she had observed, conscious of the delicate balance between professional discretion and moral responsibility. She waited patiently as Dominic continued reading, allowing him to remain immersed in his routine, all while silently assembling the phrases she would use, each word chosen to convey the pattern without accusing prematurely, to offer clarity without confrontation. The room's warm light illuminated the soft textures of the leather chair and polished wood, adding a calm contrast to the urgency she felt internally, each shadow and reflection emphasizing the intimacy of the moment and the weight of the information she held. After several minutes, Dominic set down the top document, leaning back in his chair and stretching slightly, unaware of Olivia's careful presence and the conclusions she had reached about the underlying cause of his ongoing fatigue and pallor, the mystery that had puzzled everyone else now crystallizing in her mind with a clarity born of persistent observation and careful record-keeping. She made a final adjustment to the stack of folders beside her before softly clearing her throat, a subtle signal that drew Dominic's attention without startling him. And when his gaze met hers across the study, she felt the gravity of the moment, the unspoken understanding that she was about to reveal a truth hidden in plain sight, the truth of his condition and the presence of a pattern no one else had recognized, all quietly documented and ready to be disclosed with care, patience, and unwavering focus that only someone who had spent weeks watching, listening, and understanding could provide. Dominic Moretti glanced up from the documents on his mahogany desk as Olivia stepped a little closer, her notebook clutched in both hands, the faint glow of the desk lamp highlighting the determination in her eyes. The late evening shadows of the mansion stretched long across the polished floors, creating an intimate space where the ordinary rules of power seemed to soften. And Dominic felt the unusual weight of attention focused solely on him, a combination of concern, observation, and quiet insistence that was unfamiliar yet compelling. Olivia's voice was calm but firm as she began to outline the patterns she had meticulously recorded, noting times, locations, and the subtle gestures she had observed from Ethan Caldwell during each incident, her fingers tracing entries in the notebook with precision as she spoke, each point building a case not from accusation but from careful observation and undeniable evidence. Dominic listened without interruption, initially skeptical, his piercing blue eyes narrowing slightly, scanning her expression for signs of exaggeration or error, yet finding none. Her calm demeanor, combined with the clarity of her documentation, created a tension in the room that was electric yet controlled, the kind of moment where one could feel the air hold its breath between words. The faint hum of the mansion's heating system and the distant sound of a clock ticking became amplified in the quiet study, punctuating each observation Olivia delivered and giving her points even more weight, while Dominic's posture shifted subtly, the usual composure giving way to a rare acknowledgement that the information might hold merit. She continued, describing the repeated sequences of Dominic taking drinks and subsequent subtle changes in his complexion, referencing each instance with care, her eyes meeting his without hesitation, allowing him to witness both the evidence and the unwavering attention of someone who had been unnoticed for months but had seen what no one else would. Dominic's hand drifted to his temple as he processed the information, a soft exhale escaping him as he recognized the repeated timing and the consistent presence of Ethan Caldwell, the assistant he had trusted implicitly, and a shadow of concern crossed his face for the first time in weeks, not for his health alone, but for the realization of how closely Olivia had been watching, how much she had noticed in silence, and how precise her conclusions were. The warm glow from the desk lamp reflected across the polished wood surfaces, illuminating the small details of the room, the scattered documents, the subtle sheen of Dominic's cufflinks, the notebook Olivia held, each element emphasizing the quiet gravity of the confrontation unfolding without confrontation, relying on attention to detail and quiet courage rather than spectacle or drama. Olivia's posture remained steady, her presence measured and professional, yet filled with the understated power of someone who held critical knowledge. And as Dominic leaned back slightly, closing the top document and resting his hands on the desk, the room seemed to settle into a delicate equilibrium, a space suspended between authority and revelation, tension and understanding, where the invisible cleaning lady had finally drawn the attention of the most powerful man in Chicago, and the foundation for the revelation of truth had been solidly laid. The following morning, the mansion was quiet except for the soft echo of footsteps and the distant hum of the city beyond the windows, as Olivia Carter carefully made her way toward Dominic Moretti's private office carrying a small envelope with neatly organized pages inside, each documenting her observations from the past weeks. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting warm streaks across the polished marble floors and highlighting the subtle tension in the room as she approached, her movements deliberate, quiet, and purposeful, ensuring that she maintained the professional invisibility that had allowed her to gather this evidence unnoticed. Dominic looked up from his desk, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers with a mixture of curiosity and cautious anticipation, sensing that the moment had arrived when he would understand the scope of the truth she had quietly uncovered. Olivia placed the envelope on the polished surface and gestured toward the contents, her expression calm, yet resolute, conveying the importance of the information without needing to speak more than necessary. She watched him carefully, noting the shift in his posture as he began to review each page, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flicker of surprise in his eyes, and the brief pause in his breath that suggested recognition of the pattern that had eluded everyone else until now. The room seemed to hold its breath as Dominic's gaze moved across the documents, scanning the meticulously recorded times, sequences, and correlations, his mind working to process the repeated presence of Ethan Caldwell and the subtle ways the assistant had been linked to Dominic's mysterious episodes of fatigue and pallor, each notation in the envelope reinforcing the undeniable sequence of events. Olivia observed silently, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her eyes attentive yet patient, allowing him the space to absorb the evidence without interruption, aware that this moment of revelation required a balance of restraint and timing, and that the quiet authority of her presence would have more impact than any hurried explanation. The afternoon light deepened into a soft golden hue, shadows lengthening across the leather-bound books and polished wood surfaces of the office, emphasizing the gravity of the discovery as Dominic slowly leaned back in his chair, absorbing the truth, his expression a mix of astonishment, contemplation, and the first hint of relief since the strange pattern had begun to worry him. Olivia felt a subtle release in her shoulders, the tension of weeks of observation and meticulous note-taking easing slightly, as Dominic finally acknowledged the significance of her findings with a quiet nod, a gesture that conveyed understanding and acceptance without a single word of dismissal or disbelief. Outside the tall windows, the city continued its daily rhythm, unaware of the revelations unfolding within the mansion, while inside, the office had transformed into a space of recognition and quiet justice, where the unseen efforts of one diligent observer had brought clarity, accountability, and reassurance to a situation that had remained hidden for too long. Dominic set the envelope aside and met Olivia's gaze steadily, a faint but sincere acknowledgement in his eyes, conveying gratitude, trust, and the realization that her careful attention had prevented further uncertainty and potential harm, establishing a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between employer and staff, between power and the unnoticed diligence of someone who simply paid attention when nobody else did. Weeks later, the mansion felt lighter. The tension that had shadowed Dominic Moretti's presence now eased as sunlight streamed through the tall windows, reflecting across polished marble floors and leather-bound furnishings, casting warm highlights that made the space feel alive rather than imposing. Olivia Carter moved quietly through the kitchen, her hands arranging freshly folded linens and wiping counters, the soft hum of the mansion's early morning activity surrounding her, yet her attention remained subtly focused on Dominic, who now stood by the window, reviewing morning correspondence with a calm composure that had returned after the discovery of the truth. The envelope containing her meticulously compiled notes lay nearby on the counter, a silent testament to the careful observation, patience, and courage that had revealed the hidden pattern of his mysterious illness and exposed the actions of those who had contributed to it. And Dominic occasionally glanced toward it, a faint acknowledgement in his expression that carried more weight than words could convey. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the warm scent of polished wood and early sunlight, creating an atmosphere that was quiet yet charged with a sense of resolution. And as Olivia moved to set a small tray with cups on the kitchen island, Dominic finally spoke, his deep voice calm but filled with subtle gravity. "You paid attention when no one else did." Olivia paused, her hands steady on the tray, and replied softly, her voice carrying a gentle certainty, "Because nobody else would." The simplicity of her statement hung in the space between them, unadorned yet profound, and Dominic regarded her for a long moment, the room silent except for the faint clinking of porcelain cups and the distant city sounds outside, as if the mansion itself held its breath to witness this acknowledgement. He took a careful step closer, placing a single cup of tea in front of her, and the gesture, quiet and understated, conveyed gratitude, trust, and recognition, bridging the gap between employer and employee, authority, and the once invisible observer whose diligence had ensured clarity and justice. Olivia's lips curved into a small, serene smile as she accepted the cup, her posture relaxed yet confident, a reflection of the quiet power that comes from careful attention, perseverance, and moral courage. Dominic leaned against the counter for a moment, the sunlight catching the sharp lines of his face, highlighting a renewed sense of vitality and focus, and he allowed himself the rare acknowledgement of vulnerability that had been carefully masked in public for months. The room remained still, every detail, the soft glow of the overhead fixtures, the faint hum of the heating system, the distant city sounds, the gleaming surfaces of the counters, contributing to a sense of calm closure, a cinematic pause where the resolution of mystery, the recognition of effort, and the restoration of trust converged in a single, quiet moment. As Olivia sipped her tea and Dominic returned to reviewing his documents with ease, the mansion itself seemed to exhale. The weight of weeks of uncertainty lifted, and in that serene, sunlit kitchen, both the White Mafia Boss and the Black Cleaning Lady experienced the quiet triumph of truth revealed, attention acknowledged, and the subtle but profound restoration of dignity and mutual respect, leaving an impression that would resonate far beyond the walls of the Moretti estate, a testament to the power of observation, care, and the willingness to see what others overlook.